Bam! What's going on, folks? MC is in the house. My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. You can go to masterchim.com and sign up for my free email newsletter. I give you a Power Program video series just for doing that, and all the information's there. I have links down in the description. 3roadstribe.com is my online community for men who are looking to basically find a group of men who are like-minded and are tired of apologizing for being a man in today's society. You can go to 3roadstribe.com. It's $9 a month, free training, interaction. I'm there. Like, it's a good time. Go and do that. All that being said, let's get started today. I got some comments already. Judge Cohen, what's up, brother man? Jesse, good afternoon to you. Big Corey, all right, good to see you. Judge Cohen, I believe, is in at 3roadstribe.com or 3roadstribe at 3roadstribe.com. That's my subconscious talking. And good to see you here. Jamie, my man up in Canada, who is watching from Facebook. Alan, good to see you. A couple of people who will usually watch on the Master Chim page. The service that I use, StreamYard, is having some issue with Facebook as usual, so I'm not streaming there. I am streaming on X, the artist formerly known as Twitter. Stellan, good to see you, my friend. All right, so let's get after it. So the utility of evil is the topic of today's talk. I figured something out in the software that I use after using it for over a year, how to actually add something. So let me just put this here. This is today's thumbnail, right? And when I designed today's thumbnail, as usual, I spent way more time than I should. There are probably YouTube experts that are looking at my thumbnail designs and going, what the fuck is he doing? Doesn't he want his channel to grow? I promise you I will figure it out eventually, but that's not always the priority, which might be the problem. But I still am very satisfied with today's thumbnail for today's talk. So, two kids here, and this is a Mid-Journey image. And I have them playing tug of war. And one of them saying to the other, loser's evil, okay? The name of the talk is The Utility of Evil. So what's the connection here? Oftentimes what people refer to as evil, without giving any other dogmatically injected meaning they were handed the definition of what evil is or what is designated evil, without that, being taken into consideration, most of the time we call the person who's evil, who's on the other side of the battle we find ourselves on. So these two kids, a tug of war, one of the things about conflict is in a tug of war, which is why it's such a great example, in order for one person to win, the other person has to lose. And the very nature of their identity in this game of tug of war is such that one person wins, one person loses. Every inch gained by one side is an inch lost by the other. That is the sort of oppositional parameters that are set up in the game of tug of war. Such is also the case in other conflicts where there is a sort of non-negotiable oppositional nature in the identities that are in the conflict. I wrote today in today's email that this is probably going to be the only time I talk about the whole Israel, Palestine, Hamas, Jew, all these dynamics. And I sort of want to get it out of the way. I was asked about a week ago by somebody close to me, who do you think Israel belongs to? The Jews or Palestine? And I said, you mean the land where Israel? Yeah. I said, it belongs to Israel, it belongs to the Jews. And he asked me, well, why would you say that? And I said, because they have it. You see, when I look at this conflict, I don't ignore history. I don't ignore the nature of a fight over resources that is, throughout history, just permeated with violence. Like, there's a certain point where if two positions cannot find a way to negotiate their positions, it ends in a tug of war. It ends in conflict. I win, you lose. That's what it's reduced to. But what happens is people start to sort of infuse their own morality into a logical assessment, or what they would share or say as a logical assessment of the situation. And I would argue that at some point, a lot of people tend to sort of leave logic, on the shelf, and they just go full bore into, I'm going to say what makes me feel good and what makes my side be the one that also has the moral superiority. I think when we look at it a little bit more pragmatically, we could look at history and say, well, this land was controlled by these people until these other people took it, right? As I'm sitting here in America, right? Yeah, we could argue, well, there was no, in America, there was no country, there was no nation, there's people. Like, okay, listen, whatever narrative makes you okay with it, or makes you, accept what happened, like, it doesn't matter to me. I don't care. I know there were some people who were like, yeah, you got to move to another group of people, and if you don't, we'll kill you. The other group was like, all right, we'll go over there. Some of them were like, well, no, we're going to try and kill you first, and that played itself out. But when we look at history, like, this isn't confusing. What winds up happening is, you have a lot of people who will be recruited or are acting of their own accord to propagandize the scenario into being something more than, a fight for, land and resources. That's usually what it amounts to. Now, I will say there is an ideological chasm between both parties in this particular conflict today. That is not going to be crossed. I said years ago, Muslims will get along with Western civilization countries or Western culture when they learn how to be Muslims the way Christians learned how to be Christian. And that isn't a knock on anybody. It's a commentary on compatibility. If there is a certain group or a group that shares a culture in a particular location, geographic location, when another group visits, they could assimilate, they could influence, they could dominate, right? They could, conquer. There's a whole spectrum of how these two groups with, we could say, offset, maybe we don't have to go incompatible yet, but let's just say offset cultures, there's a way that they become integrated. I've made pictures about this. I've been talking about this for years. And, when I look at this conflict, and people are feeling a lot of different ways, and, it's like, well, Hamas is shooting babies, shooting children. It's like, okay, yeah, that's fucked up. That's pretty fucked up. Because we're thinking the filter we're using is, I wouldn't go and shoot a baby. I've never been so mad at somebody that I went to shoot their baby or wanted to, right? That's not something that I could connect with, subconsciously. But war, like, babies die. Like, let me bring everybody up to speed here. There's never been a war that was stopped or averted because cooler heads came to the conclusion that, wait a minute, if we go through with this, babies might die. And everyone's like, whoa, nobody said anything about killing babies. Like, there's never been a war that didn't happen because that conversation took place. Hey, we were going to go to war with you. You're going to go to war with us. But, we did some calculations over here. It turns out we're going to be killing babies in the process. Like, collateral damage, right? Which is the most, like, benign, castrated term we could use for, like, babies blowing up, right? Buildings falling on babies. But we can't lose sight of what it is that we're dealing with here. Listen, do I think these people, hey, you just fight it out, may the best man win? Like, no, that's obviously, I don't have a horse in the race. There's no skin in the game to where I would become personally invested. I'm somebody who can help. But at the end of the day, to look at, well, how does this affect me and my tribe and all of the alliance that I have going out there until it touches this conflict? Like, that is what I'm reduced to, because there is no other argument to connect with one side over another, because of any other issue. And the propaganda that's going to be put out in any conflict is going to be doing just that. It's going to be trying to recruit people, trying to leverage their empathy to create this sort of personal connection where no other connection exists. The idea of propaganda is to create enough overlap in how the person sees themselves in relation to this battle that they choose a side, that they dedicate and support that one side over the other. Right now, yeah, one side in the Israel-Palestine conflict has a lot more access to creating the narrative of overlap. Now, I'm not even saying that those narratives are necessarily fraudulent. I'm just saying, like, yeah, if somebody has a reason to connect with one side over another, it improves the probability of them doing so. But don't start saying it's because they kill babies. Because what you'll have is, oh, this side killed babies. Yeah, but that other side killed babies too, but they only killed babies because they were retaliating from the first baby killing adventure that the people went on. It's like, oh, but they killed babies too. It's, yeah, you understand that one side, yeah, like it's gonna, like, if they want to put women and children in front of them because that is going to compromise the willingness of their enemy, the logical, tactical move is that. We could argue the morality of it if you want. Like, I get it. I think that it's cowardly and it's disgusting and it's all these different things. But that is because of the bias and filter of my own morality when looking at that thing. But if we're all a bunch of robots, running a simulation, right? Or this is all a video game. Let's say you're playing a video game. It's just a video game. And it's a war game, and while creating strategy, you realize that the efficacy of the other side's offensive tools are compromised if we take our little women, pixels and baby pixels and put them in front of our tank pixels, right? And we put that scenario, and it compromises their efficacy. In that context, it's like, well, yeah, you got to do that because it works. Now, I understand it's never going to be reduced to that. All I'm saying is that logic is on one side of the equation if we're just looking at it logically. The fact that one side would do that, again, obviously, is a commentary on their offset to our morality, because we would never do that, right? We would never be okay with that, throwing women and children in front of us and hiding behind them because of But don't say you don't understand why they're doing it. If one side has gotten to the point where they believe in the mission of their tribe so significantly that they're willing to kill themselves over it, sacrifice themselves over it, you think they're beyond putting women and children in front of themselves to compromise the efficacy of the other side's offensive tools? Like, I don't understand it. We could have obviously a broad conversation about all the different tactical aspects of one side versus another. We could even argue the historicity of ownership, the claim of ownership on the land, like all these different things we could have a conversation about. But when it comes down to it, one side can beat the other side in battle. And until that changes, one side gets the property. It's just the way it works. Now, this term evil, I don't know, man. I don't know. If we're looking at willingness, there is a certain point where evil would be the, people's evil alarm would start going off. I would ask, what's the criteria by which people say evil is now the label that's appropriate? Is it now anybody that does something that I wouldn't do? Is there some sort of transcendent code that these acts go against, which is, the consequence for going against these codified, rules that we live by is you get labeled evil? Is evil a commentary on a sort of dysfunctional psychosis that somebody has? Like, what's the criteria? I don't know. It's more of a rhetorical question than anything. But when we start saying the term evil and it makes us feel good to call people evil, we got to ask ourselves, well, what's the utility of it? Do we need to hate somebody to kill them? Do we need to hate one side of a conflict before we support another? Do we need those emotions that in any other aspect of your life is probably going to sabotage your ability to be at your best state? Do we suddenly now support a system that relies on that sort of emotional relationship with something in order to be functional? What the hell am I talking about? If you get everybody reduced to hating the enemy in order to support a conflict against the enemy, you have to always make everybody hate the enemy. This enemy, the next enemy, the one after that, like that's going to be an ongoing thing. And when you look at the history of the governance of people, I guess I could call it, there is an ongoing movement within the powers that be to make sure that people have an emotional aversion and disdain for who the state determines is the enemy. Again, I'm not saying we should support one side, not the other side, or these people, or, fuck those people. I'm saying we should have an ongoing ability to determine what is best for us. I'm sitting here, obviously, as an American man. I live in Pennsylvania. I have a business in New York City. So there are some biases, or I should say some alliances that I'm connected to, and that's the perspective that I'm sharing. But it's like, okay, when I look at these properties, or this property that's being fought over, it's really, well, what's best for us? And it's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people because they keep seeing these videos of babies. I could say right now, I've seen videos of dead babies on both sides of the conflict. So what are we left with here? Throughout history, you will see people who are revolutionaries recruiting the emotional support of the people by orchestrating certain acts that the people just don't have the stomach for. And why do they do this? They do this because it allows them to paint the picture of the enemy. And for some people, they just want it to be simple. Who do we hate? Who are we against? Who are we for? Those are the terms they want these things explained to them. Throughout history, there were people who wanted to take over, who orchestrated events, that were, these sort of false flag, psyop, sort of, we're going to do this thing because of the outcome that's going to occur after it's done. And that outcome is going to favor us in our pursuit of mission. So again, keep bringing it back. The utility of this term evil. Maybe some of you saw that title and are like, well, is he talking about actual evil, whatever they define that as? Is he talking about using evil, evil people, or doing evil things? Or no, the reason I put it in quotes is I want to know, why do we keep using that term? I know why, but I want that to be the question that you guys are asking. And what happens if we don't use evil? Let's say that we're not allowed to describe one side of a conflict as evil. What are we reduced to? Do we really lessen our ability to deal with it? No. Without that label, we're reduced to actually looking at the variables involved in the conflict. The Jews right now, where the fuck are they going? They define Israel as their state, right? The Jewish state. They can still get away with that. Nobody else can, but that's still their state. Hamas, all the oppositional forces in the Middle East, Muslim-driven forces that are against, recognizing, the state of Israel. They got a thing with Jews, number one, but then on top of that, they got a problem with the Jews basically setting up camp in Israel. The Jews have nowhere to go. So they're going to dig in and fight because there's no alternative. An example I'll share that was analogous to this, or there was a parallel that I saw. I remember a couple of years ago on one of my podcasts that I was doing, I was interviewing a gentleman from South Africa, and he was an Afrikaner, and he was talking about, in this particular podcast episode, the conflict that was going on between the black South Africans and the white Afrikaner South Africans, and how, when the government changed hands, Nelson Mandela, all that stuff, there was a huge movement to basically attack and strip of resources and possessions, of the whites from the blacks. And in the, hearing all these stories about what these guys were going through and enduring, there was a point where, in my naivete, on all the variables involved, I asked the guy, I'm like, why don't you guys just fucking leave? Why don't you guys just go back to Europe? And his reaction was like, he was almost like just confused by my question, because he doesn't operate under the guise or under the assumption that he is a European. His history is from Europe, but to him, South Africa, not land that his family resided in, it's like that's their home. That there is no like, this is who we are. This is what we're about. And so he couldn't connect with this idea of, well, why don't you just go back to where, hundreds of years ago your people came from? Kind of doesn't make sense. Me sitting here, in America, when my ancestors are all over the fucking place, like, where would I have to go, right? There's a certain point where it's like, no, we defend this. So I can understand Israel's position of, well, no, that's where they are. There is no, hey, just go back. There's nowhere to go to. But then on the opposite end, you see a bunch of people that do not have the sophistication and the ability to be able to mount some sort of credible threat of force. And so they are reduced to losing hands at every negotiation table that they go up against. Like, the reason I'm even describing the both sides of this conflict in this way is basically to get at the conclusion of, there is no middle ground between these people. There's no middle ground to be had, because in order for one person to gain something, the way that their identities are established, and for one side to gain, the other has to lose. And it's not lose in the form of conceding some sort of external surplus of resources. It's conceding a component of what they see as their very identity. Like, Israel can't say, well, we'll have half the people that live there now, like, moving forward. Only half. Like, that's a consent they're not going to make, because now they're less of them in their eyes. But by the same token, there's not going to be an arrangement that's made that the Hamas side of this particular conflict is going to be okay with also. Some of, the organizations that are involved in being, against Israel, part of their codified identity, as they share, is the destruction of the state of Israel. Like, that's part of who they are. It's like they joined the Kill Israel group, and they're going to sit at a table and find some middle ground with Israel. It's like they're the Kill Israel group. Like, if they don't look to kill Israel, they kind of don't have a flag, to sort of fly. So, again, the reason I bring this up is, you guys, you could pit the good versus evil narrative all you want, and you'll recruit a lot of support. But ultimately, at some point, whether now with a little bit of foresight and clear thinking, or later on when circumstance reveals itself, for what it is, at some point you're going to have to realize the only skin we have in this game is, what does this mean for us? Israel's our only ally in that part of the country. Okay. I mean, I don't know. The UFC is in Abu Dhabi. they're at least down with MMA, I guess. There are a lot of these talking points, and what were like tropes that it's like, a lot of times these things have gotten in before we had our alarms or put the fences up, and we have to question what a lot of these basic premises that we're arguing for are. Now, I could ask, an average American, who would you rather living next to you? an Israeli or a member of Hamas. It's like these things again through the lens or the perspective of what this means for us. Like, yeah, it's easy to tell which group of people and how they conduct themselves are more overlapped with our way of life, but that cannot undermine our commitment to staying true to where we are in this. What's the benefit for us? America first is the thing, and that's what leaders of America are supposed to be connected to. So what is it that you guys are talking about? All right. Big Dog Alpha, what's up? Judge Cohen writes, good and evil are constructions of luxury, not nature, a.k.a. All else is error. And, that's at the heart of it. That's the position that history will support, and if history supports this, I would call it a universal and say the future is probably going to support this also. Good, bad, good, evil, like these terms, there needs to be a utility to them because it's just too easy to just label one thing over another. Like I never registered as a Republican, let's say. I have a lot of conservative positions. Most of my positions, I would say, are constitutionally driven. I'm a big fan of the Constitution. As flawed as it may be, right? Best thing we got going. But I'm not a Republican. Certainly not a Democrat. Not a libertarian. These are labels and groups that come with a whole lot of other baggage that I'm not signing up for. So I'm pretty much independent when it comes to what team I play for. But when I vote, I tend to vote, more conservatively. I think when we understand who we are at the scale of the self, at the scale of the individual, we start making decisions that take that into consideration. If we are, let's just say, sending, I don't know, billions of dollars to like Ukraine. Oh, wait, we did. If we're doing that because we're trying to help in some battle, like understand the narrative needs to be that the person that they're facing is evil, like all of those variables are at play. They have to be. Russia needs to be evil. Putin needs to be evil. We can't just paint it in the picture of, well, this is the person that's going against somebody that we consider to be our ally, because that is too like vanilla. It's too middle road. It's too mainstream. We need a little spice in how we describe this conflict. So we recruit people's emotional reactions to them. How many of these fucking idiots had Ukraine flags in their houses? People from Ukraine, like, hey, you guys got to pass, but I support you. It's like, what a dumb fuck you are. What a dumb fuck you are. And some of you guys might have a Ukraine flag, on your house right now, and you're not from Ukraine. Well, you're a dumb fuck too. I don't know what to tell you. When people are recruited, they're recruited by their emotions at a large scale. They're not recruited by an argument, a position. There are only so many people that are going to be able to deal with these issues. And it's not a matter of intellect, it certainly helps. But there's a sort of point where people are just too emotionally connected to some topics to be able to look at them objectively. And with conflicts that are existing on the other side of the world, almost nobody's going to give a shit about it unless there's some sort of narrative that gets them feeling about it. That's how we send all this money to, Ukraine, but supporting our borders here in America is racist. Like, that's how those two things can coexist. There needs to be a story that makes sense of that, because fucking logic doesn't. Rockstar, what up? Corey writes, this conflict could escalate into large-scale war. Danger is close and means nothing good for us. Fuck war. And listen, there might be reasons for warring. There always has been throughout history. The ability, the threat of war has utility. I would argue sometimes more than war itself. But when we're looking at what this means for us right now, I mean, one of the things about the internet, the incredible internet, is that a lot of information is accessible to more people, to more people who could actually process that information intellectually than ever in history. So there is a battle of what the big propagandized points are being successful. Like which ones are winning the people, which one are winning the the masses' approval and support, and which ones aren't. Like at this point, there are still people who are now following this whole, the COVID, the latest strain, and blah blah blah, whatever the fuck the rest of the narrative of that is. Whereas I would say an overwhelming majority of people right now are like, yeah, this is bullshit. They're not doing that shit again. Any position that these people have now, 3 years ago, a good chunk of them didn't have. But eventually they caught up. Because that tends to be how these things happen. So if the propaganda has an expiration date, there's always going to be a pressure on the narrators of the propaganda to keep a fresh story going. Because there's always going to be that arc of where everyone's like, yeah, I'm over it. John Wiley, what up? Johnny Groove, what's going on? Judge Cohen writes, not at all. They celebrate the sacrifice women and kids as martyrs for the struggle. And that was when I was talking about, putting women and children in front. Another thing that I don't think people realize is not everybody wants to live like us. Not everybody, has our goals. Not everybody, wants the culture that we exist in. Think about just, if somebody feels that, in a lot of the pure Muslim cultures, and I'd say pure because to them, they're like, the book tells us how to live and what to do. No negotiation, no change. A lot of them, they can't live like we live. Because again, similar to the sort of identity chasm that exists, like in order to live more like a Westerner, they have to compromise who they are. And the consequence in that application is like damnation. It's like you're going against God through their perspective. So why would we expect them to stop that? I think it's just foolish to expect it. And it's foolish to think that they're supposed to act like we are, like there's some sort of rule book that these things, like the only rule book that people follow in war is physics. Oh, well, there are all these, there's war crimes, post-World War, they came and all these different things you can't do. Like, listen, no. Like, it's not illegal to break the law. Let's understand that. It is not illegal to break the law. It is illegal to break the law and get caught by somebody who enforces the law. That's what's illegal. But if for a second you think that your identity, your existence is bound to some sort of agreement that a third party made as to what the nature of your action should be, then you don't realize you're in the aquarium. Like you're somebody who actually thinks good and evil somehow is connected to like legislation and governments. And you're beyond my help, where that's concerned. That's not what I do. I don't unfuck retards, Can you say that on YouTube anymore? I don't know. Corey writes, those former South Africa have been there for over 300 years. Right on. When I was, talking to that gentleman a few years ago, I'll be honest, like I didn't really know the history of the Afrikaners. And now I'm much more aware of what that history was. But in part prompted by that conversation I had with him. Because I was so easily just, well, why don't you guys just get out of there? Fuck them. Let them have it. Just go back. And they're like, we've been here fucking forever. For generations. There is no other country that we know how to operate in. Right? Stellan says the Disneyfication of grown-ass men. You are absolutely right. By the way, you guys, stop bringing your fucking kids to Disney World, please. Like, I just lose a little respect for you every single time I see a picture with your kids at Disney World. It's like, oh my God. Come on, man. Come on, man. I'm not going to get sidetracked with that, but fuck. Jamie coming with some knowledge, because Jamie is a book reading motherfucker. Jamie writes, evil is a native English word, like good. At its root, it means to exceed due limits, and this caused the breakdown of a given system. If that system in question is yours, that's evil. And that is, of course, looking at the history of the term, it is much more logically driven, as we would expect. And that's one thing we could do in a modern society, is take good language and just fucking muddy it up. Judge Cohen writes, that's why Trump was so successful with world leaders. He didn't judge them as evil. He treated them like rival businesses, which they are. And I would say it's also why I think a lot of Americans like the idea of a businessman running the country, because they do understand that there is this sort of, objective, competitive drive that they have to not become emotionally invested past the point of what is functional. Like, they play to win. They don't play to feel good or look good, right? When you get somebody in there and it's like, listen, whether it's good, bad, whatever, like, yeah, it also helps that when somebody's in there, they're already wealthy, because, like, how is it that all these fucking politicians become multimillionaires when they get paid, fucking less than I do? It just doesn't make any sense. Corey writes, we're out of our fucking minds entertaining any of these thoughts of war. There's a war going on right here at home. I'm with you, brother. And there are priorities. It's one of the reasons, where these priorities, the scale and priorities are concerned. I've talked about it for a long time publicly. The guy that's losing his mind over what Joe Biden's doing right now. But you look at him and he's out of shape. He's unhealthy. He has a bad marriage. He doesn't have a productive relationship with his kids. He's not making enough money to support the lifestyle. And the lifestyle he has is inflated by surpluses that were installed by disconnected identities who succeeded in their ability to make him a consumer. Like, this guy's got some shit that he needs to work on before he starts yelling about Joe Biden. But what happens? A lot of people, becomes their cathartic ritual. If I could yell and argue about this thing, I'll find other people that'll join me in it. It gives me a little bit of camaraderie, allows me to let some of that frustration and anxiety dissipate, winds up being cathartic. Same thing with sports. The person who has absolutely no influence in the political system at a national scale, who's losing his mind over what these people are doing and putting himself in a negative state, you are the exact equivalent to the person who does that same thing about sports. Like, you're that same fucking guy. I don't care what anybody says. You have to prioritize the things that are in your power. That's why everybody's all fucking ass backwards when it comes to dealing with stress and anxiety and, all these different things that people need to do just to be able to function. Well, why don't you just get your fucking head in order? It starts with you and it goes out from there. Aaron says, it's sad how many people you just described. Hello, by the way. Hello to you. And I agree. I agree that a lot of people, described by that. I wouldn't say it's sad. And the reason I wouldn't say it's sad is because, just think about it. Those people don't get access to my state. I've talked about this before. When I got out of high school, I worked at a camp for handicapped children, right? Camp Oakhurst in Oakhurst, New Jersey. It's since changed its name. I worked there for, I think, a total of 3 summers. And some of the kids had, mild cerebral palsy, all the way to, paralysis, quadriplegic, extreme, cerebral palsy where their bodies are almost completely spastic, of just a varying spectrum of physical disabilities these kids had. And one of the things I realized about, these kids early on, which is why it was one of the most just, powerful experiences of my life, is some of these kids, all they knew was the body that they had. They didn't know what it was like to not have those issues. They weren't living in a deficit according to their experience and therefore their identity. They've been playing the same game they've been playing their entire lives. obviously from the outsider, we could look at these children and we could say, oh, it's so, I feel so bad for those kids, because immediately we make the comparison of what the drop or the decline would be to go from where we are to where those kids are. That is what we're making the commentary on, right? And I think when you look at, those people, those types of people who grow up with a struggle that's as natural to them as anything, the last thing you'll find is any despair. It's like they're playing the game as you play it, and it was a very a powerful, realization that I had some years after, when I realized that some of the issues that those kids had were terminal to a certain extent. They were going to escalate in severity, and I had campers that wound up passing away years later. And it's just like, it's sobering to look at, how just fortunate we are when compared to what they are by our criteria of what fortunate would be. It's like some of these young kids who wind up passing away before they're 21 years old. Some of them, when they pass, like, they're grateful for everything they had. They have a different take on it because it's the only take they've ever known. But a lot of times when we look at those situations, we immediately compare us to them, which is normal. It's natural, right? But we don't really realize how much mirroring or how much of a reflection that is in our interaction with that situation, right? The same thing that's like when you get advice from people. One of the things about getting advice from people is a lot of times, what they would consider advice is often, little more than a narrative that's designed to make them comfortable. And it's not that they are some bad actor, that they are being, manipulative with some sort of devious intent. But a lot of people don't realize just how much who they are sort of imposes itself on the conclusions they find themselves coming to when looking at their surroundings. Even in advice, somebody would give you advice, and like, I remember when I started my school, I was a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, which is the second belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Not the belt that people usually start schools, but circumstances were what they were. I didn't have a place to train, and I had an opportunity to teach classes at this one other martial arts school, which eventually grew into my academy. And when I did it, there were a lot of people who were telling me, like, what are you doing? Like, you should go to another school over there to train, or go over here to train. And they didn't get it. And they saw what I was doing as a big risk. Well, what do you do that for a living? It's not a way to make a living. You're not going to you should be doing this and that, or you should get a good job. You should become a cop. You should become a fireman. You should become, get a job with the electric company or whatever. And what they're doing is they're trying to give me advice, but all they're doing is looking at my scenario, looking and hearing what my intention is, and then comparing that to their own identity and what they're doing with their lives. And what winds up coming out in the form of advice is little more than the thing they say to feel better about themselves doing what they're doing instead of doing what the other person they're advising is doing. Most people, that's the type of advice you get. Aaron says, can I switch that to pathetic instead of sad? Absolutely. Permission granted. Mad Guardian and evil and invention of the clergy. And here's the thing, like, if you look at the clergy, you look at organized religion just as a tribe, as an identity that has leadership, that has, in it a drive for self-preservation. It's like, well, sure, some things that occur are going to help the self-preservation. Some things aren't. And it makes sense. It's like, how could he rob that old man? Well, the guy doesn't have any money, and the old man had money, so he took it from him. But that doesn't make it right. Well, you didn't ask me if it was right. You asked me how could he do it? Like, the situation's there. Like, if he doesn't have that thing that makes robbing old men immoral or, so contrary or oppositional to who he is as a person, it makes sense on logic's level, and again, it's like, this is how you deal with people. It's you don't expect more than what logic dictates you're going to get. Relationships allow you to discover overlap. It allows you to generate even overlap. But without that overlap of identities and the alliances and the benefits of what that overlap means, then we should deal with people pragmatically, preemptively. We deal with them pragmatically, logically first, and then you build from there, right? Judge Cohen said the first member of the tribe not required to contribute to physical survival was the priest. Well, I don't necessarily know that that's true. I understand the point you're trying to make, and what I would offer is, when you look at what the mission is of a tribe, right, and you look at the RPS formula of tribalnomics, it's in the book. It's been part of my stuff for a long time. There's the role of the shaman, and the shaman, it's his job to remind everybody what the identity of the group is. When you go to a priest, and the priest in your particular religion, let's say it's Catholicism, right? Most of my family's Roman Catholic. You go to a priest and you look for guidance from that priest. Well, one of the sort of presuppositions is he is going to tell you how to be a better Catholic. He's the guide for what the answer is to gain more overlap to being a good Catholic to the individual who's asking the priest a question in the first place. So there is utility at a certain level of the group. As it scales, there is utility in having somebody who's in charge of making sure everybody understands the mission. And if that mission is codified in some sort of dogmatic way or some sort of cultural way, then it makes sense. The tribe is benefited by having somebody who does that. At what point or in what case that person also has no physical expectations, I'd imagine that would vary from group to group. But I think when we look at the individual roles, like the role of the shaman, isn't mutually exclusive necessarily from the role of the warrior at a certain level of scale, right? All right, guys, I'm going to call it there. I moved my office around. Still trying to make this thing look reasonable. I think it looks okay right now. That's my whiteboard. That's my sauna. Extra mats. That's my bow. The black sun right there looks like a black sun. That's a stability ball. Figuring shit out. Anyway, I don't even know what the hell I'm talking about. I hope you guys appreciated and enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed having it. Like I said, this is probably the only time I'll talk about the whole Israel-Hamas thing. And as expected, I don't have any fucking answers for you. I just have questions that I think will lead people on more productive paths. What does this mean for you? What's the priority? How upset are you getting about one thing that's not connected to you when compared to how upset you're getting about something that is connected to you? And I think if everybody carried their own weight, literally and figuratively, the world would be a better place because of it. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate you guys hanging out. MasterChim.com. All the links are down there. I'll see you guys next week. Like, subscribe, do everything. Most of the time people watch this, they don't subscribe. They watch this, they don't like. They watch this, they don't comment. And you do what you got to do, but just understand I benefit and these talks benefit the more people show up for the party. All right. Again, I'm rambling. Appreciate you guys. See you guys next week. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.